Hello again. Welcome to Embedded Python for ObjectScript developers. My name is Bob Kuszewski. I'm a product manager here at InterSystems. Today's talk is a follow-on to the Introduction to Embedded Python video, where I'll go in depth on the detail of how to use ObjectScript and Python together. Where the introduction video provides strategies, this one goes through very specific APIs. I'll give you a short introduction to what we call the language bridge that acts as a connective tissue between Python and ObjectScript, and then dive into two long demos. As a quick reminder, we have fused Python with ObjectScript and Iris. That is, both the ObjectScript and Python interpreters are running side by side inside the Iris process. Having both runtimes together allows for toll-free bridging between the two worlds, and the language bridge is what makes that happen. And that's what we're going to go into great detail on today. The real magic of embedded Python is an internal component called the language bridge. The bridge acts as I mentioned, connective tissue between the two languages, and it serves to connect functionality, smooth out impedance matches, and generally simplifies moving between the two languages. For the most part, the bridge works quietly in the background, but it also exposes APIs in both ObjectScript and Python. On the ObjectScript side, we've added the $system.python library, which provides everything you need to work with Python. And conversely, on the Python side, importing the Iris module gives you access to ObjectScript. So let's see the language bridge in action. The first set of demos focuses on the ObjectScript side of the bridge. After that, I'll demo the Python side. In this demonstration, I'm going to walk through several examples that demonstrate how to use Python libraries from ObjectScript, including a few places where you could get tripped up. For today's demo, I've written a small Python library that integrates with Google's Maps API to do things like looking up a zip code of an address. You can see the Python code here on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is an Iris terminal session where we will interactively load the Python library, create an instance of the class, and call each of the methods up from the ObjectScript. Iris 2021.2 introduces the $system.python library, which provides APIs that facilitate working with Python inside Iris, including the first thing I'd like to show you, which is how to load a Python module. So you do so like this. $system.python.import loads, or as Python calls it, imports a Python module and returns it to you as an Iris object. So if we Z-write that object, we'll see that it's an object of type %sys.python. All the Python objects, when you see them from ObjectScript, will be of type %sys.python. But you see the further information tells you what kind of Python object it is. In this case, it's a module. So now that we've loaded our library, let's instantiate one of the objects from this class that we defined here called MapBasics. Now, if we Z-write our MapBasics object, we'll see that, again, it's of type %sys.python. But its further information says it's a Python object of type of class MapBasics from the MapBasics library. One of Python's built-in features is the dir utility, and it returns a list of all the methods available for an object. Python has a number of built-in methods like print, the list type, those sorts of things that we wanted to make sure is available to ObjectScript developers to ease working with Python objects from ObjectScript. So here, we've made the built-in library available through $system.python.builtins. So we just call system.python builtins.dir, and we will see all of the methods that are available on our MB object. And you'll see all of the methods that were defined in my class, along with all of its member variables. In this case, it's called client. But you also see Python's built-in methods. These are the ones that start and end with underscores. These are the so-called dunder methods. We'll talk about those in just a minute. So now I've loaded a Python module, instantiated a class. So let's use the class. Let's suppose I'm organizing a meeting at InterSystems headquarters. In my invitation, I want to say how far it is from the Kendall MIT T-stop. My map basics class has this distance method that returns to you the number of meters between two locations. So let's say that we gave it the address of both 1 Memorial Drive and 300 Main Street, which is the address of the Kendall MIT T-stop. And it returns 631 meters. You notice that function call looked just like you would expect from any other object in ObjectScript. You just call the object name dot method name, and you give it parameters. Here, behind the scenes, we're converting between ObjectScript strings and Python strings. You don't have to worry about any of that. The base types all just work right out of the box. Also on my invitation, I want to include the zip code for headquarters. So I see here on the right-hand side that we have the postal code method that's defined that returns the postal code for any address that you give it. So let's try that out. Postal code 1 Memorial Drive, Cambridge. Perfect. Ooh, you notice the syntax there didn't work. We got an error. And that's because there's an underscore in the postal code method name. This is an example of, but there are a number of other similar examples where there's a difference between what is a legal name for a method or a variable in Python than in ObjectScript. So we can solve this problem just by putting postal code, the name of the method, in quotation marks. So now if we call postal code in quotation marks, we'll see that 02142 is the zip code for 1 Memorial Drive. That comes up a lot. I'll show you that again in just a minute. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is passing lists into Python. So as we've seen before, most of the base types like strings and integers are automatically converted to their Python equivalents. However, you do need to explicitly convert lists. For this example, my map basics library includes a distances method. And this takes a list of places you're going to and from. And it'll return to you how far it is between those places. So let's say that I wanted to know how far it is to Seattle, which is the site of the next InterSystems Global Summit, from various places around the country. And I had an ObjectScript list of places we're going. Well, we're all going to Seattle. And a list of places that we're coming from. Well, we're coming from a number of places all around the country. So now when I call my distances method, I have to call the $system.python.toList helper function, which converts from ObjectScript lists into list form in Python. And the results here you'll see is an array that has a distance for each of the destinations, or each of the from places that we're coming from, and that it's 4,895 kilometers from Cambridge to Seattle. It's a good thing I'm flying. All right, now let's see how to use Python's named parameters feature. So sometimes Python methods take a long list of optional parameters, and one way that really cuts down on bugs and makes it easier to read is to use named parameters, where you just say the parameter name equals some value, comma, some other parameter name equals some other value. In ObjectScript, we can take advantage of this same feature using ObjectScript's dynamic objects. So we'll create here, let me just clean our terminal here so you can see better. So So let's say I created a dynamic object in ObjectScript called args that has a start, an end, and a mode. And then I can pass them into a Python method using this ... syntax. So in this case, I'm calling Google Maps' Directions API, and it returns to me the directions from the Kendall MIT T-stop to our headquarters. So let's take a look at what that directions returned. So it returned a big object that's a little hard to read and understand. So this comes up pretty typically in Python libraries, so I'll take a moment to show you how to work with these kinds of objects. So do you remember those dunder methods we talked about earlier? Those are the methods that start and end with the 2 underscores. These are all part of what's called the Python data model, and that describes standards within Python for getting the length of and iterating through objects. Just Google Python data model and you'll get all the information you could possibly want, but I'll show you the basics here. So if I wanted to get just the first step of our directions that I should be using, I can call the getItem dunder method, and remember that has to be in quotation marks because underscore is not legal in Python method names. And I say I want the 0th element of the array. So Python arrays are 0 based. That's another thing I wanted to make sure you did. So here we see the first thing that you need to do. Well, let's say I just wanted to pull out the HTML instructions field from this. There's a lot of information here. So these things are composable, as you may imagine. And when you're looking up an item from an array, the index is a number, like 0. But if it's a dictionary, like this one is, the parameter that you would give would be a string. So let's say I want the HTML instructions, and we see that heading east on Main Street is the first thing you do when you get out of the Kendall MIT T-stop. So thanks for going on this quick tour of how to use Python from within ObjectScript with me. I thank you for your time. We learned a lot of good things, and I hope this is helpful. Now that we've seen the ObjectScript side in action, what happens in my Python code if I want to create a class or manipulate globals? Let's find out. Now I'd like to show you the basics of how to interact with Iris from within Python. Python has a built-in interactive shell which works much like the terminal sessions in Iris, and you can start the interactive shell from within an Iris terminal session just by running $system.python.shell. And from here we can run any Python command that we'd like print welcome to Virtual Summit. But what we want to cover in this session is how to use Python to interact with Iris, and that all starts with the import Iris statement. This provides various APIs for instantiating classes, working with globals, SQLs, transactions, locks. So let's start with the iris.cls method. That gives you access to the class definitions. So for example, if I wanted to load the class definition of this class you see on the right-hand side, here's how I'd do it. Iris.cls, and then I give the name of the class. This loads the class definition, and from here you can call any class method defined in the class. So in Iris, we're used to using %new to create a new instance of a class. So let's see if that works from within Python. And of course it doesn't. And this is because there's some differences in the rules for what's allowed in a method name, what characters are allowed in a method name between Python and ObjectScript. ObjectScript allows for %, up carets, Unicode characters. These are all illegal in Python. So what we've done is we replace all of those illegal characters with the underscore. So if we use underscore new instead of %new, we'll see that we successfully instantiate our address class. So let's look at what that address object is that got returned. So here it's telling us that this is a Python class, and it's of type iris.demo.address. And you see this over and over where it'll be iris dot and then the name of the iris class. So you can just look out for that. Now I want to show you how we can use these iris classes. And you use them just like you would a Python class. So here's a method. You can see what the method is on the right-hand side, called normalize on there, on the object. And it just works. You can also access all of the properties exactly as you would expect. Class dot property name, and we'll return that. So let's save the object. We'll use that later. Don't forget, replace that % with a underscore. The iris library also gives us access to globals. So the gref function is what you're looking for here. And this returns a global object. And you can set the value of a global object by, as you may imagine, the set method on it. So set will either create or update depending on if the global is already there. And we can make sure that it's saved properly by using the get method. Yay. Now, we've also added methods in the iris library to make it easier to use SQL and data frames. So you can use iris.sql.exec to execute any SQL statement. So in this case, let's pull out all of those demo.addresses. And this returns a result set object. And from that result set object, you can iterate over it like you can iterate over any Python object using the for statement. In this case, I'll just print out each row that got returned. And you'll see that we just have 2 rows in that table. For situations where you want to execute the same SQL over and over again with just some different values, you could use parameterized SQL. And the way you do that is with the prepare statement. So for this example, I'm just going to use, let me show you quickly, the Alzheimer's question and aging data set. And this is questionnaire results from various topics, and it's broken down by topic, it's broken down by age, broken down by location. So let's prepare a statement where we can say, all right, we will pull out all of the results based on your topic. And let's execute that a couple of times for different topics. So I will create 2 result sets here, one that pulls out the mental distress questions and one that pulls out the obesity questions. So here you can see that these return result set objects. Let me actually show that to you. Any result set can easily be converted into a pandas data frame. In case you don't know, a pandas data frame is a standard container for data that's used throughout the data science community. Having your data in a data frame lets you use it with hundreds of industry standard data science tools. So first, to do that, we need to load the pandas library. Import pandas. And now we can convert our test results to a data frame just by calling the data frame method on any of the result sets. Let's say we wanted to know how many of the, now that we've got the data in this data frame, like what can we do with it, right? So let's say we wanted to know how many of the obesity questions were answered by people in each state. Here is the syntax that pandas provides out of the box for that. I'm not going to go into all the details of that syntax. I'll show you the syntax again. I won't go into all the details of that syntax. I just wanted to show you a common use of data frames. If you want to know more interesting use cases for data frames, check out the NumPy, SciPy, or Pandas documentation. They've got all kinds of great stuff. So that's it. Just to summarize, I showed you how to import the iris library, use the iris objects, manipulate globals, and work with SQL. Thank you. So in summary, I touched on the important role that the bridge provides for resolving impedance mismatches between the languages. We demonstrated the role of $system.python in loading and using Python classes from ObjectScript. And we demonstrated the role of importing the Iris module to load and use Iris classes from Python. I hope you found this talk instructive and helpful. What do we have else going on? We've mentioned we have several more sessions on embedded Python that are available. As I mentioned at the top, this talk is a follow-on to the Introduction to Embedded Python. If you haven't already seen it, I encourage you to go watch that. Also, Edward is doing a session that dives into using embedded Python to create new interoperability components, and Raj has a great session on debugging Python in Visual Studio Code. We're also running a hands-on embedded Python experience lab. This is an instructor-led workshop where you'll be able to use embedded Python. I'll be there along with many of my colleagues to answer any questions that you might have. Once again, my name is Bob Kuszewski. If you have any questions, please either use the Q&A feature or feel free to send me email. Thanks, and I hope to see you in person next year.